Wyoming Territory, late August of 1879. The sun was just clearing the jagged peaks when Willa Carver stepped down from the stagecoach into the dry dust of Bitter Creek with nothing but a canvas bag, a small satchel of sewing tools, and her pride. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, and the soles of her boots were near gone. But when the driver tried to offer her a coin for luck, she stared him straight in the eye and said, "I only need work, not pity." The man gave a short nod, tipped his hat, and rolled on, leaving her standing alone in the road with the wind stirring her skirts. The town was small. One saloon, one general store, a blacksmith, and a few scattered buildings spread thin across the flat land. The wind carried the scent of dust and horses and something more distant pine trees and the cool promise of higher ground to the west. She could live with that. She walked toward the livery first. There was always need for hands where there were horses, and she knew how to handle them. Her father had broken horses back in Kansas until a fever took him and left her with nothing but debts and a stepmother who washed her hands of Willa before the grave dirt had even dried. Inside the weathered barn, a man stood tending to a bay gelding. He was tall, maybe in his early 30s, worn in the way only the land could carve into a man. His hat was pulled low, but when he looked up at the sound of her boots on the packed earth, his eyes were a clear, steady green. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I am looking for work," she said. "I can clean stalls, mend tack. I can ride, too." Hard. He studied her a moment longer, then set the brush down gently. "What is your name?" "Willa Carver." "I am Lawson Temple," he said. "This is my place." She waited. He did not offer her a smile or a handout, and she was grateful for that. "I only need work," she said again, firmer this time. "Not pity." He nodded once. "Then let us work together." Her stomach twisted a little, relief, maybe, or something else she could not name yet. He showed her the bunkhouse behind the stables. It was small, clean, and empty. "You will be the only one in here. I have not been able to keep a hand lately. Either they drink too much or they lie. I do neither. Then you will do just fine." She worked through the day without rest. She mucked 5 stalls, swept the upper hayloft, and patched 2 torn saddle straps. Lawson said little, but she felt his eyes on her now and then, measuring, not judging. Later that evening, he brought a tin plate to the edge of the bunkhouse and knocked once on the doorframe. "I made stew," he said. "You do not have to take it, but it is warm." She opened the door and accepted the plate. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. He turned to leave. "Wait," she called. He looked over his shoulder. "I will work for my keep. You do not owe me this." "I know," he said, "but I am still offering." She shut the door slowly, standing in the quiet room with the scent of beef and onions rising from the tin plate. She had never needed anyone's kindness, but this felt different. She ate every bite. By the 3rd day, she had earned his trust more than any man who had come through in the past year. Lawson spoke little, but he started handing her more responsibility, letting her saddle the horses for town deliveries, trusting her to check the fence lines on her own. One morning, she returned from the north pasture with a branch in her hand. "Found this caught in the wire," she said. "Could have spooked a horse." He nodded and took it from her, their fingers brushing. She felt it straight in her chest. "You are sharp-eyed," he said. "That is good." She shrugged, brushing straw from her sleeves. "I had to be." That night, a storm rolled in from the mountains. Thunder cracked like rifle fire, and the wind lashed the barn doors. Willa ran out barefoot to check the horses. Lawson was already there, lantern in hand, trying to calm a panicked mare. "Help me," he said, and she did. They moved together in the dark like they had done it 100 times, soothing, steadying, tying the doors shut tight. When the worst passed, they sat side by side on a hay bale, soaked through and breathing hard. Lightning lit up the sky outside. Willa turned to him. "You could have left it all to blow." "I do not leave things behind," he said. Silence stretched between them. She looked at his hands, calloused, strong. Hands that had not tried to take anything from her. "You lost someone?" she asked. He nodded, eyes on the storm. "My brother. 2 years ago. He ran this place with me. Got kicked by a stallion we were breaking. Died before I could get him to town." "I am sorry," she said softly. He nodded again. "Me too." They sat in the quiet, the wind easing outside. "I lost my father," she said. "Then everything else followed." Lawson looked at her then, really looked. "You are still standing." "I have to. I know the feeling." They did not talk more that night. But when she stood to go, he handed her the dry coat off his shoulders without a word. She took it. Days passed. Then weeks. The routines settled into something easy: shared work, quiet meals, and the way his eyes lingered on her just a little longer each time. She caught herself watching him too. The way he leaned into his work. The way his voice softened when he spoke to the horses. One afternoon, while they were repairing the corral, she paused, rested the hammer on the rail and said, "I have been thinking of staying through winter." Lawson wiped his brow, met her gaze. "I would like that." She smiled. "You do not think I am too stubborn?" "I like stubborn." She picked up the hammer again, heart lighter than it had been in years. Lawson watched her work and said, "Willa, you do more than just pull your weight. You bring life back into this place." She looked up, eyes meeting his. "You gave me a chance. You earned it." And in that moment, something shifted, something real and good and steady as the land they stood on. Neither of them said it out loud. They did not have to. September settled into the valley without ceremony. The days shortened, and the air carried the smell of cured hay and cold mornings. Willa rose early, before the frost had burned off the grass, and tied a red scarf over her braid to keep the wind from biting her ears. She didn't ask for a thicker coat. She didn't ask for anything. Lawson had started handing her the ledger in the evenings, letting her copy accounts and check feed orders by lamplight. He hadn't said why, but she suspected he knew she could read it faster than he could and trusted her numbers. One night, as she ran her finger down the column of names and costs, she asked without looking up, "You ever think about expanding? Hiring more hands? Maybe breaking more than you raise?" He glanced over from where he was oiling a rifle near the hearth. "I did before. Thought I'd build on the north lot. But when my brother died, I told myself I'd just keep what I could hold." She closed the ledger. "You're holding more now." He set the rifle aside. "You think I should try again?" "I think you're already doing it." She handed him the book. "You just haven't noticed yet." He didn't answer, but when she passed by the barn the next morning, the north lot had been cleared of brush. Later that week, a letter arrived addressed to no one in particular. The post rider left it at the general store, and the storekeeper passed it to Willa because she was the only one in town who'd claimed to have schooling. She opened it on the porch of the livery, shaded by the slant of late sun. "Territory land grants," she said aloud, reading the seal. "They're surveying south of the draw. Homesteads." Lawson leaned against the post beside her. "You thinking of applying?" She folded the letter. "Thought crossed my mind. Never put down roots before. But I'm not sure what I'd build." "You'd figure it out." She handed him the paper. "You ever wondered about starting a family? I mean, more than just keeping a place running." He didn't reply right away. A magpie called from the cottonwood behind them. "Sometimes," he said finally, "but I never found the right person. Or maybe I wasn't the right man for it yet." Willa stood. "You're steady. That counts for more than you think." He watched her walk toward the corral, but said nothing else. The next evening, She brought back a wild sorrel gelding she'd found wandering near the creek bed. He was skittish, but not mean, and she had a knack for gentling things that didn't want to be touched. She named him Barley and worked him slow, not with brute force but with patience. Lawson watched her from the rail, arms crossed. You've got away with him. He's just nervous. Doesn't trust easy. You talk like you know how that feels. She didn't answer, just ran a hand down the gelding's neck. After a long moment, he said, "You've shown me more about quiet than anyone I've ever known." She looked up. "Quiet's not the same as lonely." "No," he said. "It isn't." That night, she stayed out in the barn after sundown, rubbing the sorrel down with burlap. Lawson brought a lantern and set it by the stall. "You don't have to stay out here," he said. "I want to." He watched her a moment. "You ever think about what you want long-term? Beyond today?" She stood, brushing straw from her skirt. "I used to think that was a luxury, wanting things, but lately..." When she didn't finish, he stepped closer. "What's changed?" She met his eyes. "Maybe I believe someone might want the same things." The lantern light flickered between them. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Neither did he. "I wouldn't ask you to give up anything," he said. "You're not asking. I'm telling you I might stay because I want to." He nodded once. "Then we'll build something. Together." For the first time since she'd arrived, her shoulders eased. She reached out and touched his hand, palm to palm, nothing urgent about it. "You sure? I've never been more certain of anything in my life." They stood that way a moment longer, the gelding shifting behind them, the barn warm with breath and wood and quiet understanding. Outside, the wind had settled. The trees were still, and in the hush of that space between choice and change, something real took root. By mid-October, the aspens along the ridge had turned gold, and the mornings came in sharp with frost. Willa stood at the fence line just after sunrise, one hand resting on the top rail, watching a pair of mule deer move through the brush beyond the pasture. She didn't stir until their white tails vanished into the pines. Behind her, the sound of boots crunching gravel drew her back to the day. "You always this quiet before breakfast?" Lawson asked. "Only when the world's worth listening to." He leaned beside her, arms folded, looking out at the pale blue sky edged with cloud. "You thinking about anything in particular?" "I heard from a man in town yesterday. He's got a mare due to foal in the next month. Wants me to help see her through it." "You take it." "I said I'd think on it." She turned to face him. "I didn't want to say yes unless I knew it wouldn't leave you short-handed. You're not beholden to me." She studied his expression a beat too long. "I know that, but I'm not walking off either." He tilted his head slightly. "You like the work?" "I like what it's turning me into." He didn't answer right away, just nodded once and looked out toward the pasture again. She could see him holding something back. "You've been quiet too," she said. "Something bothering you?" "There's a meeting in Laramie next week. Ranchers and breeders. They're talking about banding together on horse trading routes." "You planning to go?" "I wasn't, but I could. Might be worth something." She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, the wind tugging it loose again. "Then go. You've been doing everything here by feel. Nothing wrong with learning from folks who've done more of it." He exhaled through his nose. "I'd want you with me. If I go, then say so plain. I want you with me." She smiled, small and sure. "Then I'll go." That afternoon, she packed her things into a saddlebag. Not everything, just what she'd need for travel. The rest stayed in the bunkhouse, folded neat on the small shelf by the window. She didn't say it aloud, but it felt like a promise. The journey took 3 days. Willa rode with her scarf tied low against dust and wind. Lawson rode quiet beside her, pointing out trails and old posts where riders used to change horses on mail runs. At night, they camped near creeks and shared coffee boiled in a dented tin over coals. On the second night, she asked him, "You ever think you'd bring someone with you like this?" He shook his head slowly. Didn't think the right person would ever show. She rested her chin on her knees, arms wrapped around them. I didn't think I'd ever follow anyone's lead again. He didn't reach for her, didn't need to. The firelight flickered across his face, and she saw the steadiness there. In Laramie, the meeting was held in the back room of a feed store. About a dozen men filled the benches, maps spread across a table, talk low and serious. Lawson listened more than he spoke. Willa stood in the corner, hands in her coat pockets, watching how he held himself shoulders square, eyes steady, no need to prove a thing. When the meeting ended, one man lingered by the stove and glanced her way. "Yours?" Lawson looked at her, then back. "She's with me." The man nodded, respectful. "You've got good sense then." Willa said nothing, but as they stepped back into the cold dusk, she tugged her glove tighter and said, "Folks see things clearer than we think." Lawson adjusted his saddlebag. "You mind being seen like that?" "No," she said. "Not one bit." The ride home was slower. They stopped by a creek near the edge of the foothills, and Willa walked ahead to gather kindling. When she bent to scoop a handful of dry twigs, a sudden gust stirred the branches overhead and sent a shower of red leaves tumbling down. She turned to see Lawson watching her. He didn't speak, just came forward and took half the bundle from her arms. "You ever think about building something more permanent?" he asked. "You mean a home?" "I mean what comes after that." She studied his face. "You asking me to stay for good?" "I'm asking if you want to make this yours too." She didn't answer right away. She sat down on a flat stone, setting the kindling aside. "I've never had anything that was mine to keep," she said. "Not a room, not a name," folks said with respect. "But I've got a place now, and someone who sees me straight." He crouched beside her. "You've got both of those here, with me." She nodded once, slow. Then yes. Lawson stood and reached out a hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But their foreheads touched, hands still joined, the world around them gone quiet with the weight of the choice they'd made. When they returned to Bitter Creek, snow had dusted the higher slopes. Willa untacked the horses, stabled them, and walked into the bunkhouse without a word. She came out with her things in her arms and crossed the yard to the main house. Lawson opened the door before she knocked. "You sure?" he asked. She stepped inside. "I am." He closed the door behind her, and for the first time in a long while the house felt full. The first snow came in the night, soft and without warning. Willa woke to the sound of Lawson pulling a coat over his shoulders, the scrape of his boots on the pine floor. She sat up on the cot against the wall, the quilt still tangled around her legs. He looked over, quiet in the blue dawn light. "Roof's heavy with it. I'll knock it down before it freezes." She stood and reached for her shawl. "I'll help with the woodpile after." They didn't speak more than necessary that morning, but their silence was easy. The kind that came from knowing how the other moved, how they thought. While Lawson climbed the side of the barn with a flat spade, Willa hauled split logs to the lean-to and stacked them tight, her breath rising in pale clouds. By mid-morning the sun had broken through, turning the snow to slush along the edge of the porch. She paused to wring water from her gloves and felt a tug in her side that hadn't been there before. Lawson caught it. "You all right?" "Twisted wrong." "It'll pass. You ought to rest a spell." "I'd rather finish." He didn't press her, but he didn't walk away either. Instead, he lifted the rest of the cut wood himself, his steps sure over the frozen ruts. Inside, the fire had burned low. Willa knelt beside the hearth, coaxing it back with dry pine cones. As the flames caught, she glanced up. "You ever had a winter this quiet?" Lawson set the last log down in the corner. "Not since my brother died." She let the silence settle a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about teaching." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Schoolhouse is a half-day's ride. You'd ride out that far. I wouldn't leave the ranch behind. Just a few hours a week. Some of the ranch children can't make the trip either. I thought maybe I could gather them here. A few slates, some readers." Lawson's eyes didn't move from hers. "You miss it." "Not exactly. But it'd feel good to be useful that way. You've got the room. And the mind for it." She nodded once, then added, "I'd need your say-so, since it's your land." "It's ours now." She looked at him a moment. "You mean that?" Lawson stepped forward, his hands rough from the cold as he took hers. "I've meant it since the day you stayed." She leaned into him then, gently, her head resting just beneath his chin. His hands settled around her back, and for a long moment neither of them moved. That night, they sat by the fire while the wind pressed against the windows. Willa had found an old copy of Shakespeare's sonnets in a crate of discarded books at the general store. She read aloud without ceremony, stumbling now and then over the language, but her voice was steady. When she finished, Lawson didn't say anything for a while. Then he asked, "You think love always has to sound like that? All those tangled words?" "No," she said, closing the book. "I think love sounds like someone splitting wood so your back doesn't ache tomorrow." He looked at her then with something quiet and full in his gaze. "You've changed this place. I've only lived in it. You're the one who built it. I was only holding on before you came." The fire popped, and she leaned back against the worn cushion behind her. "I've been wondering if we should paint the trim come spring. Something light, maybe green." Lawson smiled, small and honest. "Then we'll buy paint." She turned her head toward him. "You ever think about children?" He didn't blink. "I do. I don't know if I can have any. Never tried. Never had the right life for it." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "If we do, we'll raise them strong. If we don't, we'll still have a full house." She watched their joined hands a moment. "You always say exactly what you mean. I never saw the point in anything else." The next morning, Willa walked down to the creek with a pail, the snow crunching under her boots. She stood there a long time, watching the water slip beneath the thin crust of ice where it had begun to freeze at the edges. She filled the pail and turned back toward the house, her breath steady in the air. The porch light caught on the frost along the window panes. Inside, Lawson was already setting out the day's list of tasks. His coat hung neatly by the door. She stepped into the warmth, set the pail down, and unwrapped her scarf. "Let's get to work," she said. He looked up, his eyes steady on hers. Together. By late November, the sky had settled into its winter gray, and the last of the geese had passed overhead days ago. Willa stood in the new room they'd added to the house, a narrow space with wide windows and bare shelves waiting for books, and leaned on the sill, watching snow gather in the crook of a fence post. Her hands were red from the cold, but she didn't seem to notice. Lawson stepped into the doorway behind her, a small crate in his arms. Found a few more readers down at the dry goods. Some arithmetic primers, too. She turned, brushing her palms on her skirt. "You didn't have to go all the way to town." "I wanted to. Figured the children might need more than slates and patience." She took the crate from him and set it on the writing table they'd built together, the legs still stained faintly from the varnish they'd mixed by hand. "3 families came by yesterday. Said they'd bring their young ones after the thaw. That's a full room." "It will be." Lawson leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You seem different standing here." like a branch that's finally rooted. Her mouth turned up softly. I think I am. Downstairs, the smell of beans and salt pork drifted up from the hearth. Willa pressed her fingers to the sill again, tracing the grain of the wood. You ever think this place would be more than just a roof? She asked. I didn't think I'd want it to be, he said. But now I can't picture it any other way. They shared a quiet meal that night, the kind where nothing needed explaining. Afterward, Lawson brought out a small tin box from the drawer beside his desk. He set it on the table between them without a word. What's that? Willa asked, drying her hands with a cloth. He opened the lid. Inside was a ring, simple and silver, the band worn smooth at the edges. My mother gave it to my brother before he left for Missouri. When we buried him, I kept it. Didn't know why, but I held on to it. Willa's breath caught. You don't have to. I want to. She stared at the ring, then up at him. I never asked for that kind of promise. I know, but I've made it anyway. He took her hand, unhurried, and slipped the ring onto her finger. I don't need a preacher or papers. Just you, she said. That's all I've got, and everything I'll ever offer. She laughed, quiet and full. You always know how to say just enough. They sat by the fire until the last log burned low. When the wind shook the shutters, Willa pulled the quilt tighter around their shoulders and leaned into him, her head resting where his shirt opened at the collar. I used to think survival was the best I could hope for, she said. He kissed her temple, rough lips against soft skin. Now I know what it is to live. By spring, the small schoolroom held 6 children, their boots muddy and their hands restless. Willa taught them letters, how to measure things with string, how to hold still when someone else was speaking. Their mothers brought bread, and their fathers lingered by the doorframes with tipped hats and murmured thanks. Lawson built a second barn past the south pasture, just big enough for the foals they planned to sell come summer. At night, he read by lantern light while Willa marked her lesson plans with a stub of pencil. One morning, as she carried a basket of linens to the line, she paused by the fence and called back to him. You ever think about building a porch swing? He looked up from where he was mending a bridle. You asking me to stop working long enough to sit? I'm asking you to sit beside me when the sun goes low. He smiled as he stood, brushing dust from his knees. Then I'll build it this week. They never spoke of the years before, what had been taken, what had been endured. It wasn't necessary. The land knew, and it had given them back more than they'd lost. In June, the first foal born under Willa's care galloped freely across the pasture, its legs still unsure but its spirit unbroken. The children watched from the fence, laughing, and Willa turned to Lawson with the sun at her back. He reached for her hand without looking away from the field. You did that. We did. They walked back to the house together, boots leaving twin paths in the trampled grass. The porch swing creaked gently in the breeze behind them. The schoolroom sat quiet for the season, windows open to the scent of sage and cut hay. Inside, the kitchen table bore the marks of used scratches from a dropped tin cup, a faint ink stain from a child's clumsy hand. The ring on Willa's finger caught the light as she reached to pour warm water into a basin. Lawson crossed the room, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. She leaned into him, her hands stilled in the steam. I never knew a quiet life could feel so full, she said. He kissed the curve of her neck. It's the only kind I ever wanted. They stood that way until the water cooled, the evening light turning golden across the floorboards. Outside, the wind stirred the wheat. Inside, the fire waited to be lit. And between them, nothing was left unsaid, nothing undone. They lived without fear, without question. Together, always.